Hello and welcome. My name is Melissa Galasso, and I'm excited to be with you today to talk about GASB number 93. GASB 93 was issued in April of 2020, and it addresses a major global impact. So this has been addressed by the FASB, it's been addressed by IFRS, and that is because this is not a standard setting issue. It is not a US issue. It is a global issue. And it's not a small issue. So a little bit about the history of reference rate reform. We're going to be talking a lot about LIBOR and all the related IBORs. And LIBOR is currently the benchmark for over 350 trillion US dollars of financial contracts around the world. So when we say this is a global issue, I mean global issue. So the Financial Stability Board is an international body that tries to make sure that our global financial markets are working, right? In the age of globalization, they monitor and make recommendations. And back in 2014, they issued a report called Reforming Major Interest Rate Benchmarks. And this was really due to the 2012 LIBOR scandal. And basically what they looked at were the risks associated with the benchmark interest rates that are being used, including LIBOR. So as I mentioned, LIBOR is based on this concept of a bank and multiple banks submitting individually hypothetical rates. And so basically each bank would provide this rate, and then we would be able to use that as a benchmark. However, what we found is individual traders conspired with the rate submitters to really manipulate the setting of the rate to improve their trading results. So that LIBOR scandal obviously showed that there was a lot of susceptibility to these theoretical or hypothetical rates and really led to the search for an alternative rate. So there are currently about 20 banks that contribute to the LIBOR benchmark. And again, it's based on estimates and judgment. And so this uncertainty that we now believe was happening was created by the ability for them to really impact the valuation. So not only did I mention this is a US thing, but it is also a global item. So the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the UK regulator, they are charged with the oversight of LIBOR and basically said, we're not going to do this anymore. So the FCA chief executive outlined plans to discontinue LIBOR. And when they decided to get rid of LIBOR, we needed to come up with some outcome. So currently, the expectation is that LIBOR, the London Interbank Offered Rate, is going to go away by the end of 2021. So we are just over 18 months away from the theoretical end. And so obviously when this goes away, and when you have $350 trillion of contracts, this creates a lot of issue. So anytime we have an issue, we create a committee. And so in the United States, the U.S. Alternative Reference Rate Committee came about. And in the United Kingdom, they had the Risk-Free Rate Working Group. And so the goal of both of these was to find alternative rates. So in the United States, they ended up recommending SOFR, the Secured Overnight Financing Rate, and the UK ended up recommending the Sterling Overnight Index Average. And the reason why they are recommending these types of items is that they are risk-free rates. And so as a result, they are calculated, so they're not susceptible to as much manipulation. So in 2019, the SEC staff emphasized that they needed to have an alternative rate recognized. And so they needed to have something to be recognized and adopted so that we could have a nice, easy transition away from LIBOR. So FASB issued their standard, ASU 2020-04. That was really the transition element. They had previously issued a standard earlier that introduced SOFR as a permitted benchmark rate. GASB decided to do it in one step. So what did GASB decide to do? Well, GASB issued the GASB 93, which was again issued in 2020. It was approved by the board in March, but it usually takes them a few days to get it out onto the website. And really the goal here was to come up with a way to preserve reliability, preserve relevance, preserve the consistency, but also mitigate the impact of transition. And so theoretically, if you look at GASB 53, if you change your rate, so say currently you have a hedge and it's linked to LIBOR, and you change it to SOFR, that actually requires that you terminate the hedge. GASB 87, similar to ASU 2016-02 on the FASB side, if you change the discount rate, requires you to revalue the underlying liability and related asset. And so as a result, if you think about this, if every entity has a handful of hedges and maybe some bank notes and maybe they have mortgages and then they have leases and they're all pegged to LIBOR, which is again $350 trillion of these types of transactions, that's going to be a lot to take on it all at once. And so the goal here was to provide a more seamless transition, because really the individual entities, right, the governments that entered into these transactions did not ask for LIBOR to go away, right? It's not their fault. They are not looking at this. Now, some contracts do have a backup reference rate where it says if this reference rate were to terminate, we would use this. Others are silent. And so it creates a lot of problems for governmental entities. And so basically what happens here is we are going to have some exceptions to hedge termination. So basically this is going to give us a nice transition. So hedge accounting is going to continue to be applied to hedging derivative instruments that are effective as of the reporting period when the reference rate of the IBOR or IBOR times sufficient is adjusted. If all of the following, we have 3 slides that are going to cover all of these changes, but again, we're really looking at the goal here of hedge termination. So the hedging derivative instrument is amended or replaced to change the reference rate of the hedging derivative instrument variable payment, or to add or change fallback provisions related to the reference rate. So basically all this is saying is we are amending or changing the reference rate in this derivative instrument. In addition, the reference rate of the amended or replacement hedging derivative instrument essentially equates the reference rate of the original hedging derivative with 1 or 2 methods. So the first one is a replacement. So basically the replacement rate is going to be either adjusted or multiplied by a coefficient to get to essentially the same rate that they had originally. Or the other alternative is, if we don't have that, we can just have an upfront meeting of the minds where a payment is made between the parties to limited to what is necessary to equate the replacement rate and the original rate. So if they are, SOFR is not trading anywhere near what SOFR is, so you might have an upfront payment, or you can make an adjustment of the coefficient to get to where the replacement rate and the original rate are equal. In addition, the replacement of the reference rate is effectuated by ending the original derivative instrument and entering into a replacement derivative. They have to occur on the same day. So if you are really, as part of this, terminating your hedge, we're not going to treat it as a hedge termination so long as you enter into the new one on the same day. And then other terms that effectuate changes in the fair value and cash flows in the original and amended or replacement instrument are identical, except for term changes that may be necessary, right? So you might have to make some adjustments to those term changes, which we'll talk about shortly. So what are permitted changes related to the term? So they might be, they're limited to the frequency with the rate of the variable payment resets, the date on which the rate resets, the methodology for resetting the rate, the dates on which periodic payments are made. So those are basically, if you are making any changes to the term and those are what you're changing, then it would be a continuation again. So kind of thinking about that exception to derivative instruments. In addition, we talked about SOFR being the preferred U.S. version, so a hedging derivative instrument may be amended or replaced to change to a SOFR in 2 steps. First, you amend or replace a hedging instrument with to change an IBOR to a new rate other than SOFR, and then second, by subsequently amending or replacing the amended or replacement rate with a change to a new rate to a SOFR. In the second step, the hedge accounting should continue to be applied. That is effective as of the end of the reporting period, when the reference rate of the original derivative instrument's variable payment is replaced by an IBOR or an IBOR adjusted by coefficient or addition or subtraction. The reference rate of the amended or replaced variable is a SOFR or SOFR adjusted coefficient, and it meets the other accounting exceptions that we just talked about. So there is an exception here, basically that if you are going to replace the reference rate with another reference rate to essentially equal the replacement rate by having either that fallback provision, then they're just telling us that that is not a termination event. So trying to make this a little bit easier. In addition, they add SOFR as an appropriate benchmark rate. So FASB did this in 2 stages, GASB does it in 1. So basically now, in terms of appropriate benchmark interest rate, we have the interest rate risk of taxable debt are going to be your interest rate on direct treasury obligations of the U.S. government, the effective federal fund rate, and a SOFR. LIBOR is no longer an appropriate rate. In addition, GASB does update the definition of a reference rate. You can see here the biggest change in the definition is the removal of the reference rate examples. So they just kind of define a reference rate in terms of the price or rate but it's not the actual item itself. It's a variable along with the notional or payment provision that determines the settlement. So I think this is really important change in the definition. They also address the issue with leases, basically say the only change you're making to the contract is to replace an IBOR with another rate by either changing the rate or changing fallback provisions. And by definition, that is not a lease modification. So a nice little win there. So this one is effective. So in terms of the removal of LIBOR is effective for periods ending after December 15, 2021, because that's when it's going to be gone away. All other requirements are for reporting periods beginning after June 15, 2020. However, you are encouraged to early adopt. Changes adopted to conform should be applied retroactively by restating the financial statements if practical. If it's not practical, then you're going to do it at the earliest period that you can restate. And then in the first period that you apply GASB 93, the note should disclose the nature of the restatement and its effect. And if you did not restate it because of the practicality, then you should disclose that fact. All right, so that is our overview of GASB 93. As you can see here, a nice little win for us in terms of what's going on from a LIBOR perspective. You can take a look at ASU 2004, which is the FASB version of this as well, to kind of get a grip on what we're looking at as the impact globally. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope to see you on a future webinar. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.